Mr. Puzder has been rather busy, I think it's fair to say. First as a nominee to run the Labor Department, and now as a newly minted author of The Capitalist Comeback, The Trump Boom, and the Left's Plot to Stop It. Welcome, Andy Puzder, now back to Bloomberg, coming to us today from Washington. Great to see you, Andy.
Good to be here.
As I say, you've been through an awful lot since I last talked to you on Bloomberg.
True.
And I must say, having looked at your book, read your book, I want to start actually where you start, in that foreword, with what is a rather painful experience of going through this nomination process. I'm mindful of the fact that just today, Dr. Ronny Jackson had to withdraw his name. What did you learn? What could we learn from Ronny Jackson about the process and how we could do it better?
Well, I think, Vince Foster, who, as you recall, was an attorney in the Clinton administration, worked with Hillary Clinton, once stated that around here, destroying people's lives is a sport. And I think it's really become a sport in these nominating processes. I think Dr. Jackson, from all accounts, I didn't know him, but 3 presidents did, and they all thought very highly of him. Mike Pompeo, who really is super qualified to be Secretary of State, still hasn't gone through that formal vote, and there were some questions about whether the Democrats would oppose him, even though the Republicans had supported Hillary Clinton and John Kerry by 96, 97 votes. So it's a very, very toxic atmosphere here, particularly since the left is so committed to stopping Donald Trump from being successful. I think they don't really have any fear that he'll fail. I think they would prefer he fail. I think they're very afraid that he will succeed, bring back economic growth and prosperity. It'll be a great contrast to the Obama years, and it'll be a long time before Democrats can elect another big government socialist. So this is a big deal for them.
Which is the subtitle of your book. You talk about the left's plot to stop the Trump boom as a practical matter. How do you assess at this point how much progress the president has made, and what are the largest obstacles between him and ultimate success in what he wants to accomplish?
Well, I think he's made a lot of, he's made really tremendous success. Just his election lifted business optimism. He then lived up to his commitment to cut regulations. He lived up to his commitment to reform the tax code. I wish we repealed Obamacare, but maybe we can do that. He's really put a focus back on American energy. I'll bet the last time I was on your show, we probably talked about how people didn't have jobs. They weren't working. GDP was low. People were working part-time jobs or entry-level jobs in our restaurant and trying to support families, which really isn't appropriate. That was a very bad time for the American economy. In literally 16 months, and this is the capitalist comeback, in literally 16 months, we've gone to a point where we've got the lowest number of people on the unemployment rolls in 44 years, back to a time when the labor force was much smaller, 6.2 or 6.3 million jobs, an historic high number of jobs. And more people employed than have ever been employed. So more people employed and still job openings with a very low unemployment rate back to the Clinton years. We've actually moved to the point where we're not talking about people unable to find jobs. We're now talking about the problem being businesses unable to find employees to fill good paying jobs. So there's been I was surprised by how dynamic his capitalist economic policies turned this economy completely on its head, and
Right.
That's the Trump boom.
Until you start talking about trade, because then you have U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, which will cost manufacturing jobs, U.S. tariffs on Chinese products, which could hurt farmers. So could all of this offset all of the gains that you've just mentioned?
Well, sure, of course it could, but I think I'd like you to look at it a little differently for a moment. It's steel and aluminum are a little trickier to talk about because there's national security implications. But let's just talk about tariffs generally. Look, the tariffs brought the Chinese to the table. Xi Jinping stated about a week or so ago, okay, we'll look at intellectual property, we'll look at tariffs, we'll look at what we're doing with exports. Now, the left criticized that, saying, oh, he would have done that anyway, and it's stuff he already talked about. But the message he was sending was, I'm at the table. Donald Trump's got China at the table. That was the point of these tariffs, was to get the negotiations going. We've had 3 presidents that tried to negotiate with China and failed. China laughed. Or think about NAFTA, if we want to pull it out of the China context. We went into these renegotiations on NAFTA. We said we're going to put tariffs on aluminum and steel. Canada and Mexico got very upset. So the president said, look, while we're negotiating, hold back on the tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, if you were the person negotiating that deal, the NAFTA deal with Mexico and Canada, would you feel in a stronger position or a weaker position after the president took those actions? Well, obviously, you're in a stronger position. There's a difference between wanting tariffs because you're trying to save failing American companies. That's not the point of these. And using tariffs to try and get people to the negotiating table. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
But then there's also a difference between pulling out of the trade deals completely, because that's what the president did with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Also, there's a difference on how you treat China and other potential rivals and the European Union and South Korea that are big, strong allies of the U.S. So how do you justify them?
Well, let's take South Korea, because we've done that. And I'll talk about China and the European Union in a minute. Don't let me forget. But if we look at South Korea, we renegotiated the trade deal back in 2011 or 12. Our trade deficit has grown by $31 billion since then. In automobiles, it's grown by $33 billion since then. So the problem here is obviously automobiles, and they weren't letting us import over 25,000 automobiles per manufacturer per year. Well, so the president went in, negotiated a deal with South Korea where they raised that to 50,000. So now American exporters, American car companies have a better chance to recoup any investment they may make in South Korea. And he's redone the deal. You look at TPP.
Andy, excuse me for interrupting, but that sounds great. How many cars were we actually exporting to South Korea? Did we ever actually go up to the number? We never made it to the number. We never made it to the 15,000.
Yeah, but you got to look at it like you're the head of Ford or GM. You can't. If you know you can only get X number of cars into a country, you're not going to invest in marketing in that country. You're not going to invest in developing products that would appeal to that demographic, to the people in that country, because your profits are capped. So now we've lifted the cap, and we'll see whether or not more car companies go into these countries and sell more cars. So I think they now have the opportunity to do that. And respect, look. Free trade, it's only free if it's fair. If somebody's blocking us, that's not fair trade. And what happened with China, you pay a 25% tariff on automobiles we export to them. They pay 2.5 when they export here. That's not fair. With the European Union, we have to pay, if you're selling Fords that are manufactured in the United States and Europe, you pay a 10% tariff. You want to sell a BMW here, you pay a 2.5% tariff. These are the things that President Trump is bringing our trading partners to the table and saying, look, this isn't fair. What you're doing here isn't just, and free trade has to be fair trade.